Welcome back to the King Exchange. If you live, work, or commute anywhere in Central Florida, you already know the story. Our population is booming, our infrastructure is under immense strain, and the future of regional mobility is at a critical crossroads. Joining me today to co-host the conversation is Jane Washington, founder and CEO, David Washington. David, welcome, as well as Kellen Clark, our operations director. As part of our ongoing discussion regarding transportation and mobility, to help us break down where those decisions are heading, our guest today is Eric Grimmer. Eric is the chair of TransMac, the Transportation Mobility Advisory Commission. He also serves as a lead in the Orlando NIMBY organization, works as an attorney for the Social Security Administration, and recently chaired the Sustainable Growth Committee for 2024 Orange County Charter Review Commission. Eric, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, Eric, let's start off with the foundation of your role. I want to learn more about TransMac. TransMac, as I know, is a voter-created commission, and when residents hear advisory commission, there can sometimes be skepticism about real teeth or oversight. As infrastructure demands strain current county roads, how does TransMac ensure true transparency and maintain taxpayer trust?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So yeah, just a little bit of brief background on TransMac, because I do think it's pertinent here. Like you mentioned, we were created by the voters of Orange County in November 2024 as their charter amendment to the Orange County Charter. And you can think of the charter as the Constitution for Orange County. And we were created as part of the election process in 2024. And that kind of makes us unique as an advisory board in Orange County. There are a lot of different advisory boards in Orange County, but this one was created by the voters who identified, an issue that we all experience every day in Orange County with our transportation system, and saw the need to create a citizen-led advisory board to, consider our transportation issues. And I am one of those citizens. As you mentioned in the introduction, I'm an attorney by trade for the Social Security Administration doing disability law. I'm not a transportation professional, but I am a highly engaged member of the community who's passionate about housing and transportation issues. So I do think TransMac operates, as a unique space. And one of our primary responsibilities as identified in the charter is to review the proposed transportation expenditures for the next fiscal year in Orange County. And we make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners on projects that should be prioritized and funded for the next fiscal year. And we begin that budget review process, in our January meeting, and then we continue that through the spring. So we just recently in April made our recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners for the transportation priorities for next fiscal year for 2026, 2027. So providing that oversight on the budget is really one of our primary roles, and I think a very important role, because I'm sure we'll get into later today. One of the primary issues with our transportation system here in Orange County is that we just don't have enough funding. We're one of the few, if not the only, major metropolitan area in the country that does not have a dedicated funding source for transportation. So our transportation funding competes with the general revenue of the county for many other priorities and very important priorities that we have in the county. So between those competing interests, there's only so much money we have available to dedicate to our transportation system and improving it. So we have to be very cognizant and very deliberate and intentional about how we're spending those dollars. And I think one of the reasons that TransMac was created was a recognition by the public that maybe the way we've invested our dollars in the past have not been put to the best use to create a functioning, multimodal, efficient, modern transportation system. So that was kind of our role from the beginning, is to examine how we're spending those dollars and make recommendations. Should we be doing something different? Should we be investing in different type of projects? Should we be focused on making our roadways safer? We hear that all the time. So that oversight and bringing that citizen perspective as to what we are experiencing in our day-to-day as commuters, as residents in the county, bringing that to both the Orange County staff level, who we work very, very closely with at TransMac, but also to the Board of County Commissioners to make recommendations about, hey, this is how we think we want to be investing our limited transportation dollars, and these are the projects we think that would be most effective to addressing some of the issues we're experiencing.
Thank you, Eric. And, that answers or can go into a much deeper conversation, but thank you for providing that overview. I have some questions regarding those priorities that you were, talking about. How is the commission advising, county leadership to prioritize certain immediate relief? Can you go into the specifics when it comes to possible safety upgrades, expansion of maybe links, expedited routes? Like, how specific does these priorities go, or is it budget and then it breaks down from there? Could you go maybe deeper into that?
Yeah, sure. So how we think about our budget when it gets presented to us is we basically think of it that there's like three major buckets to the transportation funding. One is, like you mentioned, our public transportation. That includes both Links and Sunrail. Now, as to the specific way that Links and Sunrail use that funding, that's not necessarily within the purview of our board in terms of we think you should spend it on this route or this improvement. We do recommend a rendition on the funding amount, but in terms of how things function at those agencies, that is more within their purview, which I know that Orange County government and our elected officials sit on those boards as well, so they participate in that process. Now, we certainly make recommendations about the need to, and I think the board is unanimous and always has been about the need to invest more of our transportation dollars and public transportation, especially for increased and enhanced services for Links and Sunrail. But in terms of our direct oversight of how that money is spent, a little less, a little more detached, since they kind of have their own distinct agencies that have their own boards and prioritization. Now, when you talk about Orange County transportation projects specifically, that's where we have more of a direct oversight. And I would say one of those other two buckets is what we call kind of those countywide projects, which are smaller things that happen all over county, but you're talking about like your sidewalks, you're talking about your traffic signals, you're talking about your roadway resurfacing project. Now, we do see all that information brought to us, and we do get specifics on some of the at least the ideas that the staff has about the projects that we look to prioritize for that upcoming year. But when it gets to us, they're still kind of early in that process, so we kind of get an idea of some of the things that they're focusing on, some of the ideas that they have, but really in terms of a final project list, they're not really quite all the way there yet. So we do provide an advisory role and give feedback on some of the ideas that they have. Um, and then that third bucket would be kind of those major projects. And that's where you're talking about, I mean, honestly and traditionally, we're talking about roadway expansions or creation of new roadways, adding lanes to our existing roads or creating entirely new roads for the county. To help with ease some of the traffic congestion that we're experiencing across the entire county. And those are major multi-year, multi-decade, multi-million, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollar projects, right? Those are the ones we get the most information on because they are the biggest projects. So we talk very explicitly and very detailed about the exact nature of those projects. What exactly are we proposing? If it's a roadway expansion, how many lanes do we have? How many lanes are we going to? How wide are those lanes? Because we've learned at TransMac, something that people may not know as just members of the general public, because I know I didn't, is that just the size of your lanes contributes to the safety of our roadways. The wider your lanes are, the more comfortable people feel driving at higher speeds. So regardless of what the posted speed limit is, if a road feels comfortable to drive on at a higher speed than that, most people, and honestly, including myself, and I try to become more cognizant of this over the years, but we do feel just kind of automatically feel safer to drive on roadways that feel wider and our lanes are wider, the roadways are wider, and things like that. So we talk a lot about those kind of design features on those major projects, but also how we building or expanding the sidewalks that accompany those roadways to provide safe avenues for multimodal transportation or even recreation, right? Sidewalks can be recreational for people to walk on, not only transportation. But what are the size of those sidewalks? So, and the size of those sidewalks kind of dictates, what kind of transportation is going to be accommodated. If you have your traditional 5 foot wide sidewalks, it's great for people walking, maybe not so good for people who want to walk, but also people who may be using the sidewalk to bike as well. Or what we've seen in the county recently is more building of more what we call multi-use paths, which are basically just wide sidewalks, right? 10 foot, providing more space for people to walk, but also for people who want to ride their bike, again, either for transportation or recreation. So we talk about a lot of those individual improvements as well. We talk about on-street, bike facilities, bike lanes, basically. And traditionally in Orange County and, the state of Florida, and honestly, pretty much nationwide, if we do provide on-street bike lanes, a lot of the times that they are just a strip of paint. That is the only thing separating a cyclist from a car that could be going 40, 60, sometimes even more miles an hour. And as I don't consider myself a cyclist, but someone who bikes for transportation, I do it every day. Um, that is something that I've always been very passionate about, even before my time on TransMac, is not only expanding those bike lanes, making them wider, because some of them tend to be very narrow, especially on some of our older roads, but also providing physical protection that separates cyclists and people driving, that will make people both more comfortable to use the bike lane as it exists and the people who use it currently, but also hopefully to try to persuade others that they can use a bike lane to get to a destination that is nearby, again, either for transportation purposes, but also for recreational purposes. So for those major roadway projects, we get a lot of detail and we spend a lot of time talking about those designs and how we're funding them and which projects we're choosing to prioritize funding towards, or which are going to be more on our long-range transportation plan.
And thank you for providing those examples and going into more detail. I do want to loop in David and Kellen to sort of into the conversation about those specifics. But before I do that, I do have just two more questions regarding TransMac. And so the first is, you mentioned TransMac being, a board voter commission advisory. And so with general citizens, as yourself, like by practice, you're an attorney, what is the benefit, in your opinion, of having general citizens rather than, politicians in the sense of that? Or, if you could explain why that's the benefit or why that would be helpful for the county.
Yeah, I mean, I just think we bring a very unique and specific perspective, because we're all residents, but we also all live in different areas of the county. So we all have different day-to-day experiences with our transportation system. And so we definitely bring a diversity of experience and perspective. Myself as an attorney, we also do have a transportation engineer. We have people who are in software development. We're kind of a wide, diverse board in terms of experience in that way. So I think it's kind of unique and we all bring our different perspectives. But I think why it's important to have a citizen-led board is to kind of bring those fresh ideas, bring the voice, be the voice of people who may not be as engaged in maybe the local official political process, that many of us are. I think we come to this for a reason. We're all very dedicated, very civically engaged, so we're already predisposed to kind of want to be involved in something like this, and we recognize the importance of it. And I think that how we differ from maybe work than Orange County staff, obviously they have a lot of experience, they have the education, they've been doing this for years. But I think you find that sometimes, just like any other occupation, you kind of get into, a groove of things. You've been there a long time, you've been doing things a certain way for a long time. And as a member of, a large institution, being the Social Security Administration, like I kind of see that firsthand sometimes, kind of institutional, just you continue to do things the way you've always done them in a large institution, right? So I think we've seen that the way we have done things for a long time in Orange County with transportation maybe has not worked, at least recently, as well we would have liked to. So bringing some fresh ideas and fresh perspective to kind of break some of the log jams that you may see and manners of thinking that occur in large institutions, I think is a critical role that we serve. But also with the elected officials, they are responsive to their constituents, right? And their constituents, honestly, for the most part, because most people, don't realize, they think, I think reasonably so, that, oh, we have traffic, so we need to build more lanes and we need to build more roads. So there was more place for the cars to go and we get to places faster. And though I'm not a transportation professional, I've done a lot of reading on this subject and been very immersed in these for the last few years. Like, we basically know that doesn't work. It's a thing called induced demand. The more lanes you build and the more roads you build, more cars will just come and drive on them. It's a if you build it, they will come situation, right? So we build more roads and more cars just fill them up. So, but elected officials, they have to be responsive to the wants and needs of their community, and a lot of people do want more roads. So they kind of have to balance those interests, what they may know or may believe is better for the long-term vision of the county, but also the people who they respond to. And we, as a board, we don't have those pressures. I feel like I do represent my community, but I'm not an elected official. I'm not directly responsive in that way. So I think it's important to listen to my community. I'm very engaged in my local community here. But I also feel it's also my responsibility as a leader in that way, which I think we are at TransMac, is to also bring what I've learned and try to tell them and share with them what I have learned throughout this process. Because 5 years ago, I was in a very different place in terms of my education and knowledge in these topics, as in it was minimal, non-existent almost. I just knew whatever else knew. And I probably had the same ideas if I thought about it at all about how we solve transportation. And I've realized that it's kind of counterintuitive. The way we've been trying to do it just doesn't work. So I believe it is my role as a TransMac chair, but also member, is also to work with members of my community to kind of share that knowledge with them. And I don't necessarily feel those electoral pressures that maybe a local elected official or candidate may feel.
Thank you. And I did have another question, but I think I'll save that for later. I want to bring in David and Kellen now to the conversation. To have an open dialogue to any of Eric's points, and to also go into different transportation issues that you may have, addressed previously or that you would like to address now. County-led rail expansion, infrastructure, the expansion of links, if that's possible, the integration of different mobility, e-bike scooters, skateboards, what would be possible in Orlando, Orange County. And so, the floor is yours, and you can have the conversation with Eric.
Kelly, do you want to go first, or should I?
Yeah, I can start us off. So, thank you for, talking about, lanes on highways, right? One more lane on I-4 is not going to meaningfully change our lives in any positive way. What do you have any particular thoughts when it comes to new roads? Do you think that there's room for new road developments, or do you think that that's kind of not the best way to go?
Well, I think it's very context sensitive, very context dependent. I would not characterize myself as generally anti new roads and new lanes as a concept. I don't think it will solve our congestion issues. But there are some locations that really just do not have the transportation road facilities they need to even try to keep up with the development. And I think a lot about that in the Horizon West area and in East and West Orange County, is that it is the biggest growth area in the county in terms of development and housing and commercial activity, but the transportation system is just so far behind, and that's kind of it's often dictated that way by certain state statutes, as when development pays certain fees and transportation, concurrency, those kinds of things, those kinds of very technical things. When that money comes into the county is a little later in the process, in the development process. So I think, and it's, to a certain extent, the county is kind of stuck a lot of times being a little behind in transportation versus development.
Yeah.
But there's certain roadways out there that for this upcoming fiscal year, they're working on expanding Reams and Fiquette roads out there. And it's entirely necessary, because there's so much development up there. But a lot of these places, they're just either one lane or, one lane on each side. They just are not prepared to handle the growth that has happened out there. Or there's a lot of environmental issues they're experiencing out there with flooding of their roadways during major storms. And that is part of these projects, right? It's not just expanding the lanes, it's allowing us and building improvements along with that to handle some of those environmental issues they're experiencing out there. So even as someone who, I don't think one more lane won't fix it, right? We do have to recognize that there are places that do require some sort of expansion just to have some sort of baseline ability to move people in that area. Because as much as I believe, in multimodal transportation as being the true key to solving congestion, I do have to recognize, and I do recognize that, not everyone is interested in riding a bus, riding Sunrail, or wants to ride a bike to work, or things like that. People are still going to drive, especially the way we have developed as a county, centered around the automobile and our development, everything being very spread out. A lot of times different transportation modalities are just not available to you, or either also not safe or just not practicable due to distance, right? So for the foreseeable future, and maybe forever, we are going to be at least somewhat reliant on the automobile here in Orange County and the state of Florida, nationwide, all those things, right? This is not necessarily unique to here. So we do have to be cognizant, and I am of that we have to improve and maintain our existing roadways. And that there are opportunities for, sometimes you do need to expand something just to handle some sort of baseline, throughput of traffic. But as something that is going to solve our transportation issues, one more lane, one more road is just not going to fix it. And something I think we've actually known for decades, that people are just, I think it's starting to become a little more mainstream, that knowledge and that information. So that's promising to hear. Certainly our elected officials talk about that more often, and see that be more of a consensus among elected officials. But I don't think that we can just stop investing in roadways altogether. It's just not practical for where we are as a community.
And you mentioned, and thank you for that. That was very thorough. It was very insightful. You're kind of mentioning, developing multimodal. We've discussed, adding more proper bike lanes, potentially ones that are even up off the ground, so that way a car won't hit them. We've talked about expanding sidewalks and keeping car speed down. What are some other modes of transportation besides walking, biking, and car that the commission has been looking into? And if there's any that have been gaining more traction than others, what have those been?
I mean, well, certainly the hottest topic these days is micromobility, and especially electric micromobility. We just actually had a TransMac meeting last night. We received a presentation from staff on the micromobility ordinance and program they are developing at the county right now. They provided that information to the Board of County Commission last month, and they came to TransMac last night to do the same presentation. So that's obviously kind of one of the hottest topics here in Orange County, and frankly, again, state of Florida, nationwide, these things are exploding onto the scene. And I consider myself a micromobility advocate because I do believe they are an essential part of a modern transportation system, especially electric versions of these vehicles, because 50% of all vehicle trips in this country are less than 3 miles, right? So if we can convert even 10%, half, 25%, half of those trips out of a car onto a different device, what kind of impact could that make on traffic congestion and travel times for people who, again, will still continue to drive, right? And that's okay, right? I certainly don't think I'm going to convince anyone who is not interested on getting on an e-bike like I am, or an e-scooter, to go out and do it. But there is an interest, right? And they are exploding, and they are part of our transportation system. So how do we adapt to them? To me, they are a classic disruptor, right? We were not ready for this. We don't have the infrastructure, especially, or the education, or the enforcement to kind of have dealt with these things. Now we're kind of reacting to them. So even though I am an advocate for these devices, because I do believe they're an essential element to our modern transportation system, I recognize we do have to do something, right? We have to update our codes and update our enforcement to try to make these things, put some more rules in place, make them safer, educate our citizens, especially, frankly, our kids. You have a lot of middle school, a lot of high school students who are using these to get to school, which I think in concept is great. I live in the Avalon Park area here in East Orange County, and I think one of the best parts about living here is we have all our elementary schools, we have our middle schools, we have our high school. That's all within 1 to 2 miles of where we all live, right? So but usually further enough where you're not entitled to a bus, right? Even at the high school level, right? So you're either getting there by car, or you're getting there by some other mode. So to me, it's a vast improvement in the transportation system overall to get these high school students, middle school students to school outside of a car, if we can do it safely. But as someone who's on those roads every day, I see that they're not doing it safely, right? They're acting extremely unsafe, and they also don't have but they also don't have the infrastructure in place that allows them to do it safely. So I recognize that we really need to, prepare ourselves for these by also not going too far in the other direction. And I hear a lot of people talking about banning them, which I think is absolutely the worst idea that I have heard. Um, I'm thankful that the county does not seem to be on that line. I think what they're proposing to do is actually very reasonable, and I'm generally a supporter of what I've heard so far. But to me, to answer your question, Kellen, I mean, that's like the hottest topic right now, and something we have to figure out how we accommodate, but still also I think promote their usage, because I think the benefits are so high.
I would like to interject for one point and sort of like an anecdote and sort of like my understanding. So I moved to Orlando for university, but I'm from New York City. And so thinking of e-bikes and scooters and all of that, that is very, that's commonplace for me. The subway, buses, and moving to Orlando, it's just so different. It sprawls out, similar to maybe even Los Angeles. But then you go to San Francisco, and it's similar to New York in the way of you can have that. In Orlando, I just don't see the infrastructure for that. And so talking about these other modes of transportation, it is something that I am interested in. I would say I'm more interested in maybe like self-autonomous vehicles and the wave of that future in AI. Looking at the obesity rate in Orange County, it's approximately 32.8%. And so I just don't see like a majority of people, and as you said, it's hard to convince people to use those types of other modes of transportation, even if it is less than just to go to the grocery store. And so for kids, it's something that, if they're not driving. So I just don't see it as something that's going to be the main contender in the future. And I feel like the shift has to be on transportation, specifically with vehicles. And another anecdote in Horizon West, for example, I see these kids zooming in and out with those scooters, and they pay no attention to any sort of traffic patterns or the lights. And it's quite scary for a driver, trying to navigate that. And so, yes, the infrastructure could be developed for that, but I think first and foremost, and I'm just under the belief, and it comes when I feel like with motorcycles or people walking or people riding their bike, it's like drivers on the road, and like I feel like that's a grievance that many other drivers, not only in Orange County, but across the nation feel. And so it is refreshing to hear that you understand that obviously vehicles will be, the future, and that's the priority. But for me, I just don't see the practicality of even having most adults use other modes of transportation. Of course, there are, communities of people who do, but just with the obesity rate, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, sure. I would push back on that a little bit, because I do think that's where the electric portion of this conversation comes in, right? Because you will hear a lot of people talk, well, this is Florida. No one's going to bike or walk in Florida, in the summer months that we're going into as it gets hotter. And I agree with that for the most part. When you're talking about pedal bikes and the all two legs of transportation, that a lot of people aren't going to do that. But when you're as someone who is an electric bike rider, I ride them year round. And I know plenty of people who do, because you get, honestly, just kind of almost like a motorcycle in the sense it's not as fast, but you do get that breeze, right? So I just do it not just in like, gym clothes, athletic wear. Like I do it in a polo and jeans, like, all year round. Because when I get there, I'm not hot. Like I'm just not, because so I would push back in that, even when you're pushing on the obesity rate, like, and I do pedal my bikes. I like to think I'm putting some physical exertion into it, that is getting some maybe a little addition exercise benefit for it. But for some of the things you don't have to pedal at all, right? And it's not hot, and anyone can do it. So I would push back a little bit on that, Sean, that people just won't do it. And I've had a lot of conversations and seen a lot more in my community here. I'm seeing more adults in the past 6-8 months on e-bikes, right? So it's not just kids. People are shifting their modes. So I don't necessarily agree with that we won't get adults and we won't get people maybe who are less physically inclined to go ahead and participate. I disagree with that. But I take your point totally on what we're seeing out there on the roadways, the unsafe behavior. I do think education, but also enforcement, is an essential element of what the future is going to be. But I think it's all those things. It's education, it's enforcement, it's infrastructure, it's all those things. And to your point on autonomous vehicles, like that's something that's here now also, right? Waymo is in Orlando, so like it's just something we all have to make sure we're thinking about and accommodating. It is another option for people that, for what I understand and what I read, is actually a little more safer than human drivers, which
Yes, it is.
sharing the roads with some of these people out here, I'm not surprised that maybe the Waymo is a little safer because you see some
Our
crazy stuff out there,
kids,
as we've all seen,
especially.
right? Now, and maybe also besides being safer, it makes it more efficient to a certain extent. They know where they're going, so traffic flows a little more smoothly. Maybe that's the case, but again, as long as we're entirely centering our transportation system on cars, even autonomous or otherwise, right? It's a
Mhm.
simple geometry problem. Cars take up too much space on the road and transport too many people in order to be the main focus of a transportation system in a major metropolitan area. You just don't have the space. It's a simple geometry problem. So, yes, it is part of the future. It will be part of our transportation system. It cannot be the focus if we want to solve some of those other things, especially the traffic congestion. It's just a car centered, not totally deprioritized, but a car prioritized, car centered. We won't get there. We don't have the space.
I appreciate your response, Eric, and I'll want to tie in David now. And I just, with the statistics, so roughly 15 to 20% use modal transportation in Orange County. And so it could be a shift that increases, it could be a shift that decreases. And I do just feel that, yeah, there are definitely communities that do. And but again, as the majority, we have to understand like commuters who use vehicles, and you
Mhm.
weren't making that point. So thank you
Right.
for providing that insight. And so, David, I would like to loop you in, of course, and have your insights and questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sean. And Eric, again, I want to thank you on behalf of the JN Washington Network and, of course, the King Exchange for joining us for this conversation. It is enlightening. So I can't
Absolutely.
wait for this to be broadcast. I have three questions. Two are the first one is more about what you just brought up is traffic. The second is what we already discussed. One of my favorite subjects, future forward,
Hmm.
electronic vehicles, autonomous driving vehicles. And then the final is more political, what to expect with a brand new board. So I'll start with the traffic. It's summertime, and
Hmm.
I live in Baldwin Park, and we have bike paths and a city grid similar to the one I grew up in and was raised in Chicago. And it seems like that grid system does facilitate traffic a little bit better than a lot of what I see in like the suburban parts of Orlando
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
the gated communities and cul-de-sacs. It's summertime. I see more people, depending on the time of the day, walking, jogging, running. Even the e-bikes come flying by or the scooters. However, what I also see is less traffic on the roads because kids are out of school
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
families are on vacation or they're doing other things besides clogging the roads, particularly during rush hour for school.
Hmm.
One of the things and I'm all over the county, one of the things that I see that frustrates me is that there's a lot of parents in the line in their car. It's just them waiting to pick up their kid. And I see on Orange Avenue, if I'm heading from Hunters Creek in the morning, there's a particular charter school in what is it, Pine Castle, that has a sheriff deputy directing traffic out of the school,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you sit there for 8 minutes
Yeah.
because you have so many cars that are going to the school, dropping off their kids, and so forth and so on. So I think if there's a solution there, that should be addressed. So I'll ask you, is that something that comes up those certain times of the day where traffic just seems to be that much heavier, that much more difficult? Have you all examined those causes and maybe possible solutions? And then I'll get to the other two.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, David. And it's funny you brought up like gated communities and cul-de-sacs because like I kind of feel like I live in like the Orange County capital of that over here in the Avalon Park area where so we have so many gated communities. I live in one. I
Yeah.
mean, I hate it, but that's a whole nother conversation. I don't didn't get to
Yeah.
choose exactly where I would have wanted to live necessarily. I had to consult with other members of the family for that. So I'm a little compromised, but
Sure.
yeah,
Right.
and cul-de-sacs, as well. I live in a cul-de-sac, not that my community connects to anything anyway, but it's funny you bring that up because every few years there's kind of this overhead photo that goes around. You'll see circulating online about two homes that are literally like look at a map and
Yeah.
they're next to each other, right? But then you see how you have to get there. And you have to go out one because they're in two separate communities. So have to go all the way out one community, get on the main road, and then get into
Yes.
the other gated community and drive to the back of there. So even though they're like literally right next to each other on a map, it takes you like 15 minutes to get there. And that's in Avalon Park. That same picture that
Yes.
circulated a few years is
Yes.
Avalon Park. So
Very
it's just very
familiar.
funny that you brought that up because I kind of live that life.
Yeah.
And you're right about the grid. The lack of a really city grid. And to be honest, like some of that is just geographical. Like especially in the downtown, we have all these lakes that you just kind of can't put a road through to keep things going straight. So you kind of have to go around them. So we're kind of impacted to put some of the natural terrain around here about having like a true grid system that absolutely does impact the efficiency of our transportation system, and especially over here on the east side in this area.
Yeah.
Nothing seems to connect with each other. So everything
Mm.
seems to take much longer than it should. But to your point, David, you're talking about car lines at schools. And I say like actually that's what I say quote unquote radicalized me in terms of really being passionate about this was having to drop my oldest at kindergarten when she was in
Yeah.
kindergarten. She's now going in the fifth grade. But I was just
Wow.
like, this is such a policy failure on our side that we're all just sitting here in our car lines and wasting time, wasting gas, emissions spewing into the air just to drop our kids off
Mm.
at school. And to me, it's almost worse in the afternoon, right? Because you have the some parents who get there like 45 minutes before school even ends just to get in the line and to be in the
Exactly.
front of the line who sit there and just run their car for 45 minutes. And to me, like, I just, it's such a failure on our end that we have not provided safer ways for kids to get to school. I think it's way less than 10% of our kids in America get to school by walking or biking. Like, and compared
Mm.
to the 50s, it was, 3, 4 times, I forget what the percentage is, but way more, right? And, as we've grown and expanded and suburbanized America, and spread everything out, that's just become much more difficult. And frankly, I don't blame any parent. As a parent, I bike my kids to school every day, but I also recognize, I work at home. So it's a privilege for me to be able to bike my kids to school every day and take that time.
Right.
And not everyone has that opportunity.
Right.
So, and I don't blame any parent whatsoever who does not feel that it's safe enough for their child to bike or walk to school, many of these schools on their own. Because you know what? It isn't safe, right? Even as someone, and I'm an adult, so I recognize the dangers. But as a cyclist, your number one rule is always protect yourself, right? Because the cars aren't going to protect you. But what about when you're dealing with kids, right, who are still learning, still forming, right, and so they don't have necessarily the cognitive or the experience that I've had to know that I always have to be on the lookout and protect myself. So absolutely no blame to any parent who doesn't feel comfortable letting their child do that. I get it, but to me, it's a failure. It's a total failure, not on their end, on our end as
Right.
local government, as planning, as adults, right? We all played a part, whether directly or indirectly, in kind of allowing this to happen or promoting this to happen. And now we're kind of in the spot where we're having to react to it. And that's always harder than just maybe doing it differently the first time. But we learned so much about what works and doesn't work and what the impacts of some of our land development has been that now we're kind of in the very hard and very difficult situation of trying to correct our previous mistakes. So you're right, David. It's one of the biggest policy failures we have. The car lines in school are crazy. But again, I can't blame parents for being
Yeah.
fearful for their kids.
Understood. Understood. Thank you. for that answer. My second question goes to the new modes of transportation. I'm a big fan of Waymos.
Hmm.
Tesla will be introducing or is introducing now their robocabs here in Orlando. And the cost theoretically for the robocabs, which are specifically built just to transport people, could
Hmm.
be as low as 25 to 20 cents per mile. That's huge. And so is there conversation in your board about maybe perhaps a partnership with links with public transportation or even a regional transportation system or authority, metro plan?
Hmm. Yeah,
However,
yeah, comes to mind.
with the threat of maybe losing property tax funds if the property tax ballot initiative passes with 60% of the vote, there'll be less dollars.
Right.
Is there a conversation or thought for conversation into the future about one, incorporating the Waymos, the Tesla robocabs into the public transportation system, a partnership with those companies, and also preparation for the likelihood of less public funding for government services.
Yeah, I mean, on the autonomous vehicle point, I will say at TransMac, we've had a little bit of dialogue about autonomous vehicles, but I would say only a little because every time we kind of bring it up, is we get mentioned that basically the state has preempted local governments on most aspects of
Yeah.
autonomous vehicles. So like, there's only so much the county can even do, let alone our advisory board. So it's not something we have spent a lot of time talking about, only because we have limited influence that we could even hope to have in that area. But I do think you're right in terms of if property tax, you know, reform or changes to property tax were to occur, things are going to change, right? And I think we started talking about it a little bit last night as it's become closer and closer to reality. And I do think we will have to keep our options open. We will have to be innovative. We will have to think outside the box to if this does get passed and the significant amount of funding that the county or local, especially local small cities, who are so much more reliant on property tax revenue than even Orange County is. I remember there was an article in Sentinel, I think this week or last week, that some of these small cities in our Central Florida are up to close to 50% of their revenue is property taxes. I think we're about 28% in Orange County, so a little less, but obviously still a significant impact. We are going to, if that were to happen, well, first I think you'll see a whole bunch of new fees start popping up, and right, like we
Yeah.
they just can't
Yes.
lose these revenue. Like it's just
Right.
you can't function in government that way. We all want our potholes to be filled. We all want our government to provide services for us, no matter how much we think we don't, or we think we don't rely on the government. We all do. We all have received benefits from it. But we have to be creative, and one, be creative in finding those revenue solutions. We also have to be creative and like operating within this new reality. And I think kind of like public-private partnerships, with maybe what you're getting at, David. I think are going to be an essential ways to fill that gap.
Mhm.
And so as we kind of continue with this conversation in the property tax, especially if it becomes a reality, I'm sure we'll be talking about that a lot more. It's definitely on our radar. But I think, at least as a board, we're still little bit of a wait and see and see what happens. And but also be ready and be already be thinking about that if it does come to pass.
Great, thank you. And my last question is, uh, we could have upwards of maybe six, but at least five new board members, including the mayor in that mix, in Orange County government come December. What is there going to be a huge learning curve
For
for
sure.
those individuals?
Yeah, I think it's anxious, makes me a little anxious, but also it's an exciting opportunity, I think, because we're
Mhm.
really talking about charting a new course for the
Yeah,
future of Orange County. So that does make me excited to think about those possibilities. And there are certain members of the board that are leaving or have already left that I am very sad to see go. One is Mayor Demings for sure. Him, trying to put forward the transportation initiative in 2022 as kind of like his
Yeah.
legacy to get us the funding source that we need. Something I supported back then. And I always say I'll never forget, the first time I heard Jerry Demings on the Board of County Commission started talking about protected bike lanes. Right. My jaw almost hit the floor. Right. But it's just to see that we have sometimes as an advocate, you don't know if you're making any progress, right? Like, how do I know things take a long time to change? So you don't know if that's happening. But then you have the small things, like I said, when Mayor Demings first talked about a protected bike lane, like I was so excited just by him talking about it because the conversation is changing. Commissioner Moore was a big fan of our main streets. Has done great work up in Apopka and will continue to do so. She's already continuing her work, trying to make that a better place to live. My commissioner, Maribel Gomez-Cadero, who's terming out, who I'm so thankful to for all the opportunities she has given me to try to make an impact on this community. And then obviously we have our 2 new seats that are coming in with, and I've had the opportunity, more in my capacity as a lead for, as we mentioned right at the top, Orlando YIMBY, which is a volunteer pro-housing advocacy organization that I'm a part of. We have a lot of local candidates come and speak to us on their ideas about housing and transportation, especially.
Right.
So I'm very excited about a lot of the candidates that we have. And I think we have a great opportunity to continue moving forward, which, by the way, I think it's important to say, I think we are moving forward. I think we are
Good.
making progress. If you follow the Smart Growth America, who does a Dangerous by Design report every year about the communities and across the country that are the most dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists, for many,
Yes.
many, many years, the Orlando metro area was either number 1 or in the top 3.
Yeah.
We are now number 25.
Excellent.
And we have a long way to go. We don't want to be on that list at all. Obviously, that's the goal. But we have to recognize that we are really made some progress. And I have really seen that too in my time at TransMac, just how conversations change and how things change. So I think the new board that will be coming in, the new members that we will have for sure, and gives us an opportunity to continue that progress. I am looking forward to being a part of that ongoing dialogue, whether it's my role as TransMac, Orlando YIMBY chair, just community advocate. But I do think because these topics have become a lot more prevalent, I think, in the past few years, I'm seeing just more mainstream media coverage of a lot of these, which were kind of like niche, nerdy transportation topics that we all kind of loved in this community, but like didn't get a lot of coverage, like in the broader sphere. We're seeing more things like that, more dialogue
Good.
there. So I think the education level is already higher than it was for these elected officials. But it is our role, I think it's my role, to continue to help to try to impart what I have learned and try to help us continue to move forward, which, again, we are moving forward. I think we are making progress.
Great. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Sean.
Absolutely.
What sort of drives those education to what do you think was the push to get it into the trends? I understand that things do take, as you said, like many years to change. Like Betty Dyer has been in office since 2003, and it's like, okay, like we're finally getting on top of it now, maybe, but how can we prevent that? How can we be proactive now? And so we're at 25, which is great, and we make great progress on that. And the goal ultimately is not to be on the list. What can you say that we can do immediately to say, let's put pressure on public officials to really eliminate these issues? Because it's not going to happen overnight. It could take a miracle from God, but it's something that we have to do on because we can't wait another 23 years,
Yeah. I think the number one thing is honestly, and it's sometimes the hardest thing, it's to get engaged, right? And now I consider myself, I'm probably like top 1% level of engaged in my community, but I always haven't been, right? This is something that's honestly relatively new to me. In the past 5 years, have I gotten engaged in my local community this way? We all have so many things going on in our lives. We have careers, some of us have families, marriages, whatever it is, or also you just also need to have fun. We need to enjoy life, right? So there's so many things that are competing for our time that I understand how difficult it can be to even get engaged, know how to get engaged, and how to stay engaged. But that to me, it's the number one thing is get engaged in your local community because I think what what I didn't know the most about being active in my local community, and what I found like the most surprising thing to me was sometimes you feel like you can't make a difference. The problems are too big. There's too much going on. There's too many competing interests. There's too much competing noise. But I have found, especially in the local civic engagement, like you actually can make a difference. One person can make a difference. I feel like I have made a difference. Have I changed everything? No, but I feel like I have played a role. And so I want to love to just encourage anyone watching, listeners, like that you can make your community better. You can be a part of the solution. And you know what? It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done with, honestly, with my life, in sense that personal fulfillment. I have my career, I have my family, love all these friends, love all of them dearly. But to me, like, I feel like I am contributing to my community in a way that has fulfilled me like nothing I've ever done in my life. So I would encourage people to kind of get engaged, and whatever it is, the way that you feel most passionate. It might not be transportation. It probably won't be transportation. Most people find the public meetings I sit through and I love, they find them dreadfully boring. But what is it about your community that you love and you are passionate about? Get out there and just get involved and get engaged. And there's ways to do that. And that's TransMac was meant to be, hopefully kind of be a gateway to that as a citizen community, where we hold meetings in the districts. Like I said, we were in Winter Park last night. We try to get residents we go to them and try to get them to come to us and try to at least meet them halfway. So that would be the number one I would think, is like, get engaged in your community and whatever way you are passionate about. But also, I would say it's important that we continue to support our local elected officials who recognize, the changes that need to be made. We have some great members of the board who are still going to be on the board after this election. Commissioner Wilson in District 1, always talking about, micromobility and protected bike lanes and the environment, all really important issues, and pushing multimodal. Commissioner Samrat, who was just in District 5, just elected in 2024, always talking about the need to invest in multimodal transportation. So I think and we have some great members who have already been there, like I said, with Mayor Demings and Mayor Gomez Cordero, my commissioner as well. Continue to support the elected officials who are making the investments and the priorities that we all hear that we want. Everyone talks about safety, right? And everyone talks about the efficiency of the roadways. And we know more about how to accomplish those goals. We need to support the elected officials who are getting us closer to meeting those goals. And we are doing that. We need to continue to do that in these upcoming elections as well.
Well, thank you for that call to action, Eric. And we're almost running out of time here, but I want to get Kellen back into the conversation, since we've been carrying the torch for a little bit. So Kellen, if you had any other final questions.
And I apologize, guys. I have lots of thoughts. So,
No, that's wonderful.
I love talking about this stuff. So I know I maybe used to getting a few more questions in, but you kind of you set me off and I go. I'm like the Energizer Bunny. But go ahead, Kellen.
No worries. This was something we wanted to have you on. So
yeah. No, it's been a tremendous having you here, and we like the high energy kind of going off and giving us these very full answers, so we appreciate it. In fact, it's been to the degree of, actually, I think every major question I had coming in here has already been answered. So Thank you very much. And
sure.
I hope the new commission is as exciting, as good an opportunity as you're hoping it is. I really hope so.
I hope so too. I think it will be. Like I said, we met with Kenneth. I'm very excited. I'm just very passionate about this stuff. I actually love it. I say, like, I have my career and my family. This is my passion. This is kind of my life's work. And I'm so glad to be a part in whatever role I'm playing and trying to make Orange County a healthier, more sustainable, best place to live that it can be. I'm happy to be playing whatever role I can in helping us get there.
Right.
Thank you.
Eric, where can our viewers, listeners, and everyone else learn more about TransMac?
Yeah, so we have our own website, which is octransmac.com. So we have our own dedicated website. We can find our meeting schedule and other things that we're working on. You can find us through the county website as well. We're on the county calendar whenever our meetings are occurring. We usually meet once a month. Most times it is in the county administration building downtown. But we are, like I said, we were in Winter Park last night. We do make it a point to kind of go around to the different districts and kind of meet in some community centers, try to get the people to come to us. So that's a great way to find out what we're working on. If you're interested in learning more about Orlando YIMBY, like I've mentioned before, which is the pro-housing advocacy group that I work on, where we do a lot of transportation advocacy as well. You can find us at orlandoyimby.org and also all over social media. You can find me on social media, on Facebook, LinkedIn. I will say I kind of come and go a little bit on the activity. I'm in an upstage right now, so you're getting a little content out of me on those platforms, but
Right.
it'll fall off for a little bit before it hops back up on a little hit or miss. But we'd love for people to get more involved and like in the community in every way, because I said like that to me, that's the best way to help us move this work forward.
Excellent. Thank you.
I did have one more question if we have time. Just to wrap it
Hit
up.
me.
Throughout your career, but specific to TransMac, you mentioned this being a highlight and a passion for you, a fulfillment. Is there one single project or milestone that you were able to be a part of or spearhead that brought you the most satisfaction in TransMac?
Yeah, as part of TransMac, I would say that again, because we are a relatively young advisory board, as we have not even been around for 2 years yet. Our first meeting was in January 2025. So have we seen, I would say, the absolutely big changes that I would like to see? I will say not quite. But we have seen, I think, what is necessary, some of those incremental changes that are necessary to get to some of those big changes. And I'll point out a couple of examples. Many of these large projects that we talked about before, these roadway widening projects, some of them are 20 years in the making. Some of these designs for these new lanes are 20 years old. And I like to think that we have learned a thing or two in those last 20 years about what makes for a safe roadway. Right. So while these roadways, at least at this point, continue to move forward, we have seen some adjustments in their design that will allow them to be, I think, a little safer. We have seen some narrowing of the lanes, which I mentioned before. Wide lanes cause people to drive faster. So you narrow the lanes, it's kind of a natural speed reduction element. So we've seen some of that. And then taking those smaller lanes and then widening the bike lane, for example. So some of these older projects, they're 4-foot bike lanes, which are a little snug, right? So we've seen some 5, we see some 6, so we've seen things start to, at least in a design way, trend positively. And I will also say that we've seen, I think, tremendous progress from the Orange County staff, who I want to give like the biggest shout out to. They have been fabulous to work with. From the very beginning, the Board of County Commissioners gave us our own dedicated liaison to Public Works. So they have played a part in our success in giving us the opportunity to be successful. The staff has been so open to our suggestions and responsive to some of the recommendations we are making. We have seen policy changes that are coming into place based on our recommendations. I'll give just one more example. In Orange County, we had 2 kind of transportation plans. We had our 5-year plan, our capital improvements plan, and then we had our long-range transportation plan, which is basically 25 years. But we had nothing in the middle. So we were like, we know it's on the 5-year, we know it's on the 25-year, but what is the things that are just outside the 5-year? Like I think almost like if you think of the NCAA tournament, like on the bubble. What's on the bubble? What's the first 4 out projects, right? If we want to make some changes, what's on the 5-year? What do we want to bring in instead? And so staff in response to that is now working on a 10-year plan that is also going to focus on our high injury network and our Vision Zero plan to make our roadways safer. And that is in direct response to a TransMac policy. So when we prioritize things, we will at least know beyond the 5-year, what are the next things that at least county staff thinks are important, things should be coming next. So we can kind of hopefully maybe shift some of those resources abound with more of that information. So staff has just been a delight to work with. I am so thankful for them, their openness and their dialogue and their collaboration. We could not do it without them. We could not have the impact I think we've had already without their help. And just all the thanks to Orange County staff and also the Board of County Commissioners as well.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Eric Grimmer, for joining us, providing those great insights, educating. I learned a lot from this episode for sure. I'm in no means a transportation expert. I would say the majority of general citizens are not transportation experts, but it's something that is interesting to learn about because it does impact us all. I would like to mention our T8020 community, token community. Please check that out. As always, head to Jay in Washington for more info. And we love being part of our local community. David and Kellen, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, again, to our special guest, Eric Grimmer, thank you again so much for joining us, and you're welcome back anytime, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for the sound effects, David. All right. Have a good one,
It's
guys.
Friday.
Let's have some fun. Thank you, guys.